Syracuse attacking the paint wasn't just something that suddenly, as you started to do in the second half, the Orange did it all game long. They started out the game in the first half like this. 22 points in the paint in that first half. SU shot 50%. And specifically, Kyle Cuff had a layup in transition through two people midway in that first half. There was another play where Bell, he pump faked his defender, drove in, got an and one. I mean, Syracuse had multiple guys attacking that paint early on, getting inside, getting those easy baskets, and that's what really amounted to the lead. SU never trailed in this game, Jish.
Jared, I've been saying this all season long, ever since the Colgate dot that I was on, the double overtime for the Colgate game. If Syracuse realizes it has this size advantage and has a leg up inside, that should be its identity. And it should have been for a long time. Syracuse, I think, felt the need to play around J.J. Starling. That was kind of, I guess, the philosophy going into the season. J.J. Starling's our guy. We're going to be a perimeter-centric team. Chris Bell's a great shooter. Lucas Taylor can, also shoot threes as well. J.J. Starling expands the floor. You got Jair Davis. You got Eddie Lampkin. Kyle Cuff has a lot of hops, too. He can get to the rim.
Right.
He can finish at the rim. If not, he draws fouls. This is a team that always should have been playing outside in, feed inside, let Lampkin really bulldoze his way down there, let him get double-doubles every single night. It's a nice addition to this team. I really do appreciate the fact that they finally realized it. Better late than never, but it's now really too late.
It's not, especially if you do end up clinching that ACC tournament berth. And getting inside helped Syracuse amount to that lead, like I mentioned. They started the game on a 15-5 run, Jish, and it's no surprise that when you resort to going inside instead of jacking up all those threes, you have some success.
Right. I mean, it's a team that wanted to play fast going into the year as well. Adrian Autry said as such early in the year, we're a team that's going to have this many more possessions than the other team. So this is why you have to understand why we're playing the way we are, why we're playing close games against Lemoyne and Colgate, why we go to double overtime against Youngstown State. It's because we're a fast team. That's not how you built this team, though, right? And I think that this game was kind of a moment for Adrian Autry. This is a team that's supposed to play in the paint. It's supposed to be dominating smaller teams in the paint. But it's kind of a two-way sword, right? Because Syracuse not only needs to play well offensively in the paint, but if they know they're going to be doing that, they have to also defend the three ball, and that's something that they've just been atrocious at all season long.
Exactly. Jish and I are in agreement. Syracuse needs to continue attacking the paint going forward. But what do you think? Let us know at 315-443-2011. You can text us as well at 315-556-3929. Jish, this win over NC State gets them closer to clinching an ACC tournament berth, and despite all the bad that has plagued Syracuse, and there's been lots of bad, keep in mind, throughout this season, Syracuse can start fresh going into this ACC tournament if they do clinch a berth, and nobody knows that better than head coach Adrian Autry.
To the ACC tournament, that's a new season for us, and that's how we're going to approach it. We were in a lot of games. We lost a lot of games that we had control of and got away from us late. So, we feel confident. Well, at the end of the day right now, we got to get ready for our next opponent and finish out the season, and then, if we get to the ACC tournament, we'll go from there.
It's the same thing over and over. He almost sounds like a broken record in some of these press conferences. Yeah, if you lose a lot of close games late because you keep screwing up late in the game, what's to stop you from doing that again?
When
right?
It really matters, right?
Yeah, exactly. This is your first, blowout-ish win over a real team, and if you want to call NC State that, you're going to be playing teams a lot closer than you played this game. So that's not like you can just wave your hand and say, oh, yeah, the North Carolina game, that's out the window. The Pitt game where we let it slip away from us.
The Miami game where you lose to the worst team in the ACC is out the window.
Well, we were in it. We just made dumb mistakes down the stretch. It's what's stopping you from doing that again? I will give Syracuse credit because I don't think they actually will have a chance to blow it, hopefully, down the stretch. They play SMU, Virginia Tech, Virginia the rest of the way. Three very subpar, mediocre, even bad if you want to call them that.
Virginia and Virginia Tech also in the mix for an ACC tournament spot as well.
And I should say SMU actually is a good team. I'm thinking of the women's squad that's not that good. This is a team that's going to lose to SMU. And I can just hear Adrian Autry's voice already saying, we were in this game, we fought hard, or if they didn't fight hard and it's a blowout again. It's I didn't see the defense today. It's the same thing over and over and over and over and over again. He's the guy who has to change that. I'm like, I don't know how I feel about Adrian Autry saying that. Like, oh, it's a new season. Am I supposed to be excited about that, Jared?
Right, and I think Syracuse fans are asking that same question as well. But I do think as well, Jish, in fairness to Adrian Autry, you got to move on from the past struggles that SU has had all year. I mean, if you get a chance to make the ACC tournament, that is a chance to right all the wrongs that Syracuse had. And there, like I said, there were plenty of wrongs that Syracuse has had all year long in all of these games and all of these losses. But at this point, it's one game that you're fighting for. You go into the tournament, you win or you're out. And so Syracuse can take all that it's learned from all of these losses and give it everything it has and hit that reset button going in ACC play. And you can have a chance to start to right those wrongs, because when it matters most, you make some of those adjustments. Who knows? You end up on the winning side. You make a run. You go a little bit farther than some people expect. It's maybe not as much of a disappointment as this season turns out to be than the predicament that Syracuse was in earlier.
That's a really big if, Jared, because I remember correctly, this is the same coach that blew a 16-point lead against Pittsburgh in the first half. This is the same coach that couldn't close out against Boston College, took 2 overtimes.
They also came back from 17 against Notre Dame.
Sure, they came back again. Well, that's a different story because their coach is a dumpster fire as well. Let's not even get started about Micah Shrewsbury with some of the way he composes himself. Yeah, his coach, the Notre Dame coach at the end of that game, got tossed from the game, right? Adrian Autry hasn't shown that he can make those adjustments, that he really can put 2 and 2 together. I'm not saying that he can't put 2 and 2 together, but he hasn't shown that he can make those adjustments when things start going bad and keep his team's morale in it, right? You can say there's an attitude issue on the team. That's a big reach. But if you're the head coach, like, even the best head coaches can control egos, right? Like, so many teams have egos. Jim Boeheim did it for almost 50 years, controlled egos on the team. You know, that's what really separates.
You got to manage your players.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, if your team's getting down and they aren't playing well, it's up to the coach to adjust. And when you're blowing leads against Pitt, when you're going to double overtime against Boston College and Youngstown State, the most mid-major of mid-majors, how am I supposed to trust that you can coach like your life depends on it in the ACC tournament?
Right. And I'm not saying that it's going to happen. Syracuse is all of a sudden going to flip the switch. But I like the mentality that Adrian Autry has, in the sense that, okay, we acknowledge that all this happened, but we're not going to take that going into the tournament, because the only place that we can go if we take all of that and continue to bring it into the tournament is down. And another blowout loss to add to the collection. Move on, short-term memory, leave it in the back burner, forget it even happened, and go into this next game. Well, not next game yet, but go into the tournament if SU does make it in, saying, all right, clean slate, we're going against this team. What do you got?
You never know if you don't go, and everyone's going to bring up NC State from last year. Oh, you know, they had to win how many games in a row and how many consecutive days and made it to the Final Four. I just don't see Syracuse having that kind of same, foundation. You know, that team was built around 2 seniors who really locked in DJ Burns and DJ Horn. Eddie Lampkin, I think if Syracuse does turn it around, it's not going to be because Adrian Autry all of a sudden starts making adjustments and coaching better and gets his team whipped into shape. I think it'll be because of the veteran leadership on the team. I think it'll be because Eddie Lampkin steps up. It'll be because J.J. Starling can whip his team into shape. I think this really can be a player-led team if they want it to be. So if Syracuse does have any sort of success in the ACC tournament, it'll be because Eddie Lampkin takes control, plays like a really dominant center, like he has shown flashes, as we said in this NC State game, he's shown flashes to be. That's how Syracuse could potentially, maybe, wish upon a star, put a penny under your pillow, maybe the tooth fairy will come, and Syracuse will win out.
Throw a penny into a water fountain.
Exactly, right? Wish upon a star, maybe once in a blue moon, Syracuse can have another miraculous run. But if they do, that's really a bad sign for the ACC, if we're being honest.
Can Syracuse make noise in the ACC tournament? Call in and share with us your thoughts. 315-443-2011. You can text us as well at 315-556-3929 and check out our YouTube and Twitter live streams at WAER Sports Talk. Jish, if Syracuse does get in right now, the way the standings are and the way the projections are, Syracuse currently slated to play Pittsburgh in the first round, a team that SU has lost to twice. Is that a good or bad draw for round one in the tournament? I mean, if I look at the prior history of this season, I'd think it's a very bad draw for Syracuse.
I would probably agree with you, Jared. I think that's not the best draw, especially because Jeff Capel, in 2 games this season, has outcoached Adrian Autry. Came back from down 16 against the Orange in this last game. In the first game, Syracuse was relying on Peter Majstorovic to be a scorer, which is never a good thing. But Pittsburgh just grinded it out down the stretch on Syracuse's home floor, no less, was able to take the crowd out of it. So on a neutral floor, Pittsburgh gets round 3. It's really hard to beat a team 3 times in a row, but it seems that Jeff Capel has the formula on this team. And you're right, Jared. I think that would be a pretty bad draw.
And in both games, Jish, SU struggled with the perimeter defense.
Yep.
Syracuse gave up 38 points to Ishmael Leggett and Jalen Lowe in the first game alone. Mm-hmm. And then in the second game, both of them combined for 36. So Syracuse has made the same mistake multiple times now. And against Pittsburgh, you got to make an adjustment if you play a team for the third straight time and you lose both of those games. Not to mention Syracuse lost the second game on February 18th by double digits.
Feeble.
This is a bad draw.
Yeah, no, it would definitely be a very bad draw. I think that a better draw for Syracuse, there's 2 in my mind. I think Cal would be a pretty good draw for Syracuse. I know California, when Syracuse beat it back a couple weeks ago, they were missing their leading scorer, Andrei Stojakovic, and he is a sharpshooter. He would be the reason Cal beat Syracuse, but he hasn't been a reason Cal has beaten any team. They're on a 5-game losing streak, and they don't really shoot the ball well as a team. Syracuse doesn't have a really great defense, 3-pointer or 2-pointer. They rank 12th in 3-point defense and second to last in scoring defense in the ACC. If they face a team like California, they have a chance to lock down a little bit, or at least enough to get their guys going.
Yeah, Syracuse beat Cal, and I'll go with, for my pick, another team that Syracuse, well, they split the season series with. I'll go Notre Dame. I don't think, there's not a great option out of any of the teams that Syracuse could really face in that round one, but if I have to choose, I go Notre Dame, because I mentioned it a little bit earlier. Syracuse went down by 17 against Notre Dame, and they came back and won. J.J. Starling had 21 points. Eddie Lampkin had a double-double. I believe it was his 4th straight game at the time with a double-double. So if you can go down by 17 against a team and come back, that shows resilience.
It's also a good stat that Syracuse is undefeated against Notre Dame in games where it makes a 3-pointer against Notre Dame. The first
they
game,
didn't make a 3-pointer at all.
And they still only lost by 5. That shows how... That I think that if we're going coach for coach, like we were talking about, I kind of alluded to it earlier, I think Adrian Autry can hang his hat knowing that he is a better coach than Micah Shrewsbury of Notre Dame, who consistently loses his cool with the media. His team melts down, played Syracuse close twice. I think Adrian Autry would have the edge there. Another team I want to draw your attention to, Jared, Virginia as well. And in years past, that would be, what are you talking about? Virginia's this great Virginia lost Tony Bennett right before the year, one of the best coaches in its program history.
Yep.
And their offense didn't get better when he left. That was always the knock on a Tony Bennett team, is the offense was always bad, but the defense was good. The offense for Virginia is the worst in the ACC. Defense still the second best, but I think Syracuse has that size advantage. If they really want to, they can bully down low, especially because Virginia is also the worst rebounding team in the ACC. That's an advantage for Syracuse again. Granted, Syracuse hasn't been great with second opportunities at all this season.
Yeah.
But I think it gives you a good chance to win. And Jared, I want to know quickly before we send this to break. We kind of talk about, righting the wrongs of the past. It's been kind of a theme of this block.
Yep.
Yeah. What do you
definitely
think Syracuse would have to do in the ACC tournament to right wrongs at all, or to call it a successful tournament run?
Perimeter defense.
Sure.
Close out on who. It doesn't matter which team you play in the ACC tournament in that first round. Close out on their guards and close out on the 3-point line. If you're letting these mid-ACC teams, like Pittsburgh, for example, have 2 guards who combine for nearly 40. Imagine what happens when you take on SMU in a couple days and you have a better team with better guards who can potentially torch you as well. If Syracuse makes the tournament, what's going to get them farther along than many people would expect is closing out on the guards for the opposing team. Syracuse played Miami a couple weeks back. Matthew Cleveland dropped 32 points, Jish. Miami's the worst team in the conference. Their guard dropped a 30-piece on Syracuse. Syracuse has got to close out on the guards. They've got to adjust their perimeter defense. That's the biggest thing that I want to see for SU going forward.
So if they lose close, but they play good perimeter defense, is that a successful tournament appearance for the Orange?
The bar is so low this season because of everything that's happened.
Jesus.
It's coming full circle. The bar is so low because of everything that's happened. I think so.
I think if Syracuse wants to call this ACC tournament, if they make it, still not confirmed, if they make it to be a successful tournament run, they would have to at least break 500. Because, fans will still feel the pain of this season, and they should for a long time. But looking back at a season where you went 500, you're like, can't complain, whatever. It'll ease the pain going into next year. If they still end below 500 again, second time in 3 years, that's going to be a really PO'd fan base. You can read my lips.
Time will tell if Syracuse can make the ACC tournament and also make some noise. When we return, we'll break down Syracuse men's lacrosse's upcoming matchup with Utah tomorrow. They're on the road trying to bounce back after 2 ranked losses. Stick with us here on SportsNite from 8 to 9 on WAER.
News Hour from the BBC. World news reported from where it's happening.
Well, in the distance here, you can see the smoke is still rising. You get a sense of what people are fleeing from.
With analysis of what it means for the rest of the world.
We continue to mitigate the concerns for the U.S. economy, for the European economy, and the global economy.
News Hour from the BBC.
Weekdays after Morning Edition at 9 on 88.3 WAER, your local NPR station.
Americans are split over this guy.
If we don't do this, America will go bankrupt.
Elon Musk is moving fast and breaking things in the federal government, but he also gets billions in government contracts and is cutting agencies that regulate him. Who's holding Musk to account? The firings, the fallout, and the fury. Next time on 1A.
Weekdays from 10 to noon on 88.3 WAER.
Welcome back into Sports Night. Jared Valentin alongside Jish Sokolsky. I'm Jish Sokolsky. I feel like I should clarify that. Too cross for me. It's Jared Valentin. A lot of J's. It's great. We're breaking down everything Syracuse sports all the way up until 9 p.m. Thank you for spending your Friday night with us. We've already talked about men's basketball, so if you missed that, don't worry. You can go back in our YouTube live stream to listen to what we had to say about this Syracuse men's basketball team. If you want to join our conversation now about Syracuse men's lacrosse, you can call into the show. Get your voice heard. 315-443-2011, the number to the call. Or if you're a little shy, don't want to get your voice on the air, you can text us 315-556-3929. Jared, oh boy, with this men's lacrosse team, there were murmurs of a national championship for Syracuse. It would be the first time in 16 years. But after 2 losses to Maryland and to Harvard, the tune is quickly changing. That Harvard game, a 15-14 loss for Syracuse, really a travesty, only because Syracuse really should have won that game. You look at every category Syracuse led in, still somehow found a way to lose. That's just heartbreaking.
Yeah, Syracuse won the face-off battle 28-4, Jish. 28 face-off wins for
Tell
Syracuse.
me about it.
4 face-off wins for Harvard. That's absolute, and you still lose that game. That's unacceptable. Had more ground balls and shots and also lost that game. And if anyone who didn't catch that game is wondering what happened last week, well, let's quickly break down that last 2-minute sequence. So Harvard gets a 2-minute penalty. It was a cross-checking penalty on Andrew Glinski. So Syracuse gets a man-up opportunity. Hilt scores, so all of a sudden it's I believe it was a one-point game for Syracuse at that point. So Syracuse still has a man up for about 90 seconds or so. And then on the final play, Syracuse looking for a shot to tie the game. It was 15-14. Syracuse looking for a final shot. They get the ball. First of all, Billy Dwan stole it. Then they got the ball. They inbounded. And Billy Dwan lost the ball trying to go past midfield. Eventually got it back, threw it to Sam English. He sprinted on the far sideline, trying to whip a shot into the goal, and wasn't even close.
Sounds like you're practicing your play-by-play, Jared. On the far sideline? Wow. Yeah, this Syracuse team is one of the most confusing over the past 2 seasons in the clutch. You look at the Maryland game from last year. You look at the Army game from last year. Whoa, a lot of sounds going on in my ear. You look at all these different games, and Syracuse seemed like chokers, especially in this Harvard game. They had a chance to win late.
They had to win on Harvard handed them the game on a silver platter.
I would not go that far.
And Syracuse couldn't capitalize. They turned it over with a man-up opportunity.
Well, okay, I wouldn't go that far considering how well Harvard's defense did play in that second half. You can't just ignore it.
We'll get to that.
They held Syracuse to just 4 goals in the second half. Like, they figured something out, and the goalie, Graham Stevens, tip your hat to
He was
pants,
phenomenal.
because that guy, the true freshman,
he looked like a vet.
Stopped 14 shots. I mean, like, you have to tip your hat to Harvard here. But Syracuse in the clutch is a confusing team because they've lost a lot of close games the past 2 years. But where is the late game heroics that we saw against Johns Hopkins last year with that last turnover on the ride? What about the Virginia game last year? Syracuse has it in it. And that's what really makes you scared and frustrated. This early in the year, they're already showing signs of tiredness, of kind of weakness. And, we saw kind of signs maybe, Syracuse isn't as good as we thought in the Vermont game. Went really cold in the third quarter. And in the Towson game, it was really close until the fourth quarter. There were signs, but I thought Syracuse fans and commentators like us could ignore it because they were still winning.
Then you get to ranked play, and it really shows.
So Syracuse is a team that just struggles with adversity, it seems like. At least, I don't want to say that they cannot do well against adversity, but in the early showings, they have not shown that they can do it. There's a little rain in College Park. They lose to a team that they should have beaten. Let's be real. I know Maryland is the national runners-up, but Syracuse, if you want to be taken seriously as a national title contender, and as weakened as Maryland was from last year to this year, Syracuse should not have lost that game. Syracuse, to some teams, though, still is a Final Four or a great team, and maybe that's Harvard coach Jerry Byrne just trying to boost his resume, but this is what he had to say after beating the Orange by 1 goal.
Game, I go, this is, Syracuse is back. Like, I know it's not going to be the storyline going forward, but that's a Final Four team. Their game against Maryland was one of the best lacrosse games I've seen in the last 5 years. It wasn't a lot of goals, but the defensive play and the goalie play was really impressive. So I think they have a lot to feel great about as a program.
Yeah, Jerry Byrne must be a Maryland fan if he thought that was one of the best games he's ever seen. Syracuse had back-to-back shot clock violations in that game. Were slipping and sliding all over the field. Joey Spallina tried a random behind-the-back shot while he was being heavily contested.
Not to mention 4 unanswered goals in that third quarter from Maryland. Syracuse held to 2 in the second half.
Right, they were leading after the first half in this defensive slugfest that Jerry Byrne is talking about. Syracuse lacrosse is not quite back yet. We thought so after beating Jacksonville. We thought so after beating Vermont. But it's really gone to show that this team needs this adversity. I mean, I don't want to say that this loss is catastrophic for the season. We'll talk about that a little later when our reporter, Hudson Ridley, comes on. That'll be in a couple minutes. But I do want to say that Syracuse, when they've gotten the ugly face of adversity shown to them, they've kind of wilted, and that's definitely a scary sign.
Yeah, I mean, the Maryland game and the Harvard game was perfect evidence of your point. I mean, you get your best test of the season at the time against Maryland. You start off well, you go up 5-4 at the break, and then just completely collapse in that second half. The offense becomes stagnant. Maryland just explodes in the third quarter, like I mentioned, 4 unanswered goals. And then Harvard, Jimmy McCool was outplayed by a freshman. He let up 10 goals and was taken out of the game in the third quarter for Michael Ippoliti. That's how bad he was at saving shots for Syracuse. He was completely outclassed. And look, I know coming into the season, Syracuse, the talk of the town has been, this is a national title team. This is a team that can contend for that championship. It's championship or bust. We need to stop the national title talks with the Syracuse men's lacrosse team.
I disagree.
We need to stop the talks.
I disagree with that 100%. I really don't think we need to stop talking about it, but you have to talk about, how? Because now you're in the middle of the season, right? I still think there's an avenue. It's a real gauntlet towards the end of the season for top 10 teams, and, you got Johns Hopkins still the rest of the way. But I think Syracuse is figuring out the how we are going to contend. at this moment of the season. Sure, you lose to Harvard, and that's an ugly loss.
You were up at the half on both of those teams.
Yeah, they lost to Army last year. Army ended the year unranked. Like, just because they lost this early in the year doesn't mean we have to overreact and say, oh, Syracuse cannot win the national title anymore. I get you were up at halftime to both teams, but you're up by 1 to the national runners-up. Okay, this is one of the best coached teams of all time, and you're up by 2 against a hungry Harvard team that was honestly taking advantage of a lot of bad discipline from Syracuse, a lot of man-up goals for the Crimson. I think that this is kind of an anomaly of a game, and Jimmy McCool did play his worst game in Orange, and I do have faith that he can turn it around. Will Mark has sung this guy's praises from the top to the bottom. There's no way that he is some bust. I think that he still needs to kind of find his water legs, if you will, and really get the hang of being the full-time starter. But I don't think that this season's over just yet. I think there's an avenue.
I'm not saying over, and like you said, I mean, it's not going to be an overnight fix. But we got to stop but saying that this team, we got to stop putting this team on a pedestal. You said it yourself, Syracuse can't play with its food.
I did not say that, but it seems
not verbatim, but you understand where my point.
Sure, I understand what you're saying. Well, it doesn't seem like we're going to agree on this. You're listening to SportsNite right now with myself, Jish Sokolsky, Jared Valentin across from me, but little do you know, we got a third guy who's also secretly on the line. He's calling in from the mountainous state of Utah. Tomorrow's play-by-play broadcaster for WAER, Hudson Ridley, calls into the show. Hudson, how is the weather and altitude treating you out there? I know you're a Colorado boy, so is it nice to be back in the mountains out there?
It's beautiful out here right now. I will say the weather is good, and the mountains, there's a big difference between the mountains here and the mountains in Colorado. The mountains in Colorado, they're off in the distance. Here, you're right in the middle of them, so it's really it's a pretty beautiful sight.
I'm jealous of you. You'll have to hit the slopes for me. But, Hudson, Jared and I are kind of in disagreement right now, right? Mm-hmm. After this horrible loss to Harvard, we can both agree that it shouldn't have happened. Syracuse right now talks of being a title contender are kind of in question. What do you think? Because right now I think that you can't quite panic yet. Jared's saying you can't say they're a national title contender anymore.
I mean, like, it's somewhere in between. Do you start to panic, like, a little bit, kind of? But I don't know if panic is really the right word for it. And then on the other end, I mean, there's no reason we should stop talking about them as the national title contender. Jish, I heard what you said earlier about the fact that, they lost to Army last year at the beginning of the season. They lost to Maryland in quick succession, too, and it was kind of the similar start that we saw this year, and a team that still ended up getting pretty close to making it to championship weekend, just losing to Denver one game short of that. And, once you get to championship weekend, anything can happen. Do I think they will win the national championship? Absolutely not. But do I think there is a chance still with the roster that they have? Sure. They just have to play with a little bit more urgency, and that tends to come towards the back half of the year. So I wouldn't say, alarm bells are sounding and we need to shut down the national champion conversation, but, there is a little cause for concern for sure.
And I think there's a lot of reason for people to be concerned because of how the last 2 games have played out. Syracuse led at the half in both of those contests and ultimately fell. Hudson, in your mind, what does Syracuse have to do to bounce back?
Well, I mean, it's something that it might be cliche, but in the end, you do have to play a full 60 minutes, right? And a lot of the problems have come when Syracuse starts to let up runs. I don't know if there are any teams in sports in general that I've seen do a worse job of capitalizing and holding on to momentum, which is a key factor, whether you like it or not. It doesn't show up on the stat sheet, but it is a real thing that contributes to these games. If Syracuse can hold on to momentum in these games going into the second half when you're up, or you go on a 5-goal run, now let's have the defense step up or not have the offense get laxed. Sure, that'll help a lot. That is really the biggest cause for concern right now with this team, and the reality of the situation is they have the players in place, but they pick their foot up off the gas pedal far too many times. You even look back to the Vermont game, the second game of the year where, sure, some of the backups got in, but in that second half, they got outscored by Vermont. They got outplayed by Vermont. And there's multiple instances in the second half where they just don't look like they have it. So whatever the halftime locker room speeches are, those need to go a little bit better for Syracuse.
If you want Hudson to elaborate any further on what he wants out of a halftime speech from Gary Gait, you can call into the show. 315-443-2011, the number to call. The number to text, 315-556-3929, the number to text. I don't want to speculate per se on what's going on at halftime, what Gary Gait is exactly saying to the players, but you do have a great point here, Hudson. I think this Syracuse team is a great fire starter. They go from 0 to 60 real quick, and then they stay at 60. They score 5 goals out of the gate against Harvard, and then only end that first quarter with 6
And then they let
goals.
the other team get to 60.
Sure, yes. And what do you do now? How do you stop the other team from getting to 100 like they did, like Harvard did after Syracuse gave them an inch? Harvard took a mile. I don't know if this is going to be the same case against Utah. Let's kind of switch gears a little bit because the Utah game is tomorrow. This is a Utah team, lost 3 in a row. They've played a lot of close games, but they haven't really played any high-scoring games other than the upset win over Ohio State in Week 1 where they scored 19 goals. There's nobody really, if I'm looking just purely at the box score, that's going to take over this game and kill Syracuse as like a Sam King or Logan Ip did against Harvard. But Hudson, knowing the prep that you've done for this game, considering you're calling it tomorrow, is there anybody who's popping off your spot boards right now that are saying, oh boy, Syracuse needs to lock this guy down or else?
Well, just you kind of did the same thing that a lot of scouts did this past scouting cycle when looking at Luke McNamara, and you went, I don't see any guy that pops out at me off the tape. Well, you're clearly missing what Luke McNamara has done. 4 starts this year and 10 goals for him in 4 starts. Had 5 goals in the upset over Ohio State in the opener of the season. He's been fantastic, right? This is a guy that, in high school was one of the most successful high school players in the country, still wildly overlooked. Didn't get, too many accolades in terms of where he was ranked, and that kind of affected where he ended up going to school. That's an ACC lacrosse player, Luke McNamara. Full on. That's not just an ACC lacrosse player. That's an ACC starter for, certain spots. So I think Luke McNamara, is really the guy to look out for tomorrow. Ryan Steins also worries me a little bit on attack. Played against Syracuse last year and played fairly well, but if you're looking at any guy, it's the fresh face in Luke McNamara.
I mean, maybe I'm just a little spoiled knowing that Syracuse has, 1, 2, 3, give or take 4 guys that have the same amount of goal production as one Luke McNamara. Luke McNamara is the leading goal scorer for the team. He scored half his goals in 1 game, though. I mean, can we
That's
really?
Absurd.
Yeah, are we really
that's
talking?
That's an insane stat in general.
I don't know if this guy. He had 1 goal his last game, 2 goals the one before that. I don't know if this is the guy who's really going to kill Syracuse. But I mean, then again, you didn't think the Orange were going to lose to the Crimson either, so.
Exactly, and it's almost kind of, Utah in general as an offense this year has taken a massive step back from where they were last year. This is a team last year that likes to play, with a lot of pace. They did last year, they do again this year. Well, the only problem is they haven't had very good control with that pace in general, almost 17 turnovers a game this season. That's not inside the top 30, and as a result, pretty much all of their offensive metrics have suffered. So, you put Luke McNamara in an offense that is a lot more, controlled overall. I think he does a lot better of a job. So it's still a guy to keep an ear out for.
Yeah, and Hudson, going back to the Utah side of things, they come off that loss to Vermont where it was eerily similar to Syracuse's loss to Harvard in the sense that Vermont dominated possessions when they played. They won the face-off battle 19-5. They had 10 more ground balls than Utah did in that game. So Vermont had control of the ball a lot longer than Utah did. And Harvard had a lot more control of the ball than Syracuse did in this loss. But when SU played Vermont, they dominated. So to go back to that point to go back to Jish's point about this not happening again against Utah, Utah struggled against Vermont. Syracuse dominated Vermont. So this, in theory, shouldn't happen again for Syracuse, and I think this is a good chance to bounce back against a team like Utah who has struggled against another opponent Syracuse played.
Yeah, I mean, this year, in comparison to even other years in college lacrosse, there's a lot of parity, right now in college lacrosse, and especially with the rise of new programs, and players are just getting better coming out of high school. Overall, there's a lot more parity, and it almost seems like we're not at that point with basketball, but it is a lot better than college football, where it's kind of that middle ground of teams can win big games and can have big kind of rare upsets. I think the problem for Utah this year, it's been face-offs and it's been goalkeeping. Colin Lenskold in goal had a really good freshman year, kind of tailed off his sophomore year, and then last game against Vermont, he was terrible. He allowed 11 goals and only 6 saves in that one, and then you can say the same about another junior in Tyler Clokel, who's usually their main face-off guy, but after kind of a career day to start against Ohio State to start the year, he's kind of tailed off as well. So it's kind of an interesting spot that Utah is in, where last year they had these same players. They were a little less experienced, but somehow they produced better against better competition. So whether it's a slump for Utah, whether it's coaching changes, or whether it's just, not having that top-tier goaltending that they had those first 2 years of Lenskold, or Tyler Clokel at the face-off kind of falling off, those have been the main two concerns right now for Utah. And again, they played close games, right? They blew the doors off of Ohio State in an upset we didn't think would happen. And then Delaware, who was receiving votes at the time, a 1-goal game. Only a 2-goal loss to Denver, a 1-goal loss to Vermont after they had to move heaven and earth to even play that game in New Hampshire. So it's just so many factors that go into this Utah season. They're just getting unlucky right now.
You talk about Utah's goaltending struggles, eerily similar to Syracuse, again, in that last game against Harvard where Jimmy McCool struggled. But Gary Gates said a couple days ago that he believes in McCool because of the adjustments he has made going into this next matchup. He said McCool will start against Utah, that he believes in him after working with some of the other coaching staff on the Syracuse program. Hudson, I think it's a good decision because of like we talked about earlier, Jish and I saying that Syracuse has got to fix some of these wrongs, and that's the only way you can fix wrongs if you're Jimmy McCool allowing that many saves is to play again and get more opportunities. Where do you stand?
Well, what did Ippoliti give you last time out that you'd want to switch from Ippoliti to McCool, or rather vice versa? I mean, like, not a lot more than what McCool did. Yeah, it was a bad game from McCool, right? This is the worst game of his career, at least collegiately. And, you're going to have a game like that every once in a while. Even, the invincible Will Mark had a game like that last year where it was just like, oh my God, Will Mark is so bad in this game. Every once in a while that'll happen. You'd think the ship will right for Jimmy McCool. I don't see the hype around Ippoliti enough to say, okay, well, McCool, who had one bad game, we got to switch him out. I think it's the right move. If McCool starts to slump off a lot more and this becomes a consistent trend, sure, maybe you look at Ippoliti. But, right now, that was a bad loss to Harvard, right? And it was a Maryland loss that it's a good team, but it's a little embarrassing at the end of the day when you had all the hype going into the game. So back-to-back games, you get it. But other than, the effort and a bit more speed and movement on offense, like, this team just has to stick kind of to its guns and what it's doing, and in the end, it'll be fine.
I think you're right, Hudson. McCool gives Syracuse size and net. Ippoliti absolutely does not. Ippoliti is Ippolittle in that net. Listen, that's not even a dig at him. I'm a little guy too. I'm probably he might be a little bigger than I am, so I can't even say much. But tangent over. If this Utah team, if its strength is its offense, and I'm looking at the box score from last year, and the offense has taken a step back, and the Utah team only scored 7 goals against Syracuse when its strength was offense, I think that tells you what you need to know about this game. Hudson, thank you so much for taking the time out of your Friday evening before the big one out in Utah. Go have fun out on the ski slopes with some of the guys out there. Send our regards. All right, that's about all the time we got talking about lacrosse. When we return, we will talk all about the women's basketball team just clinched an ACC tournament berth last night. We'll talk about all the ifs, ands, and buts about this Syracuse women's basketball team when we return on SportsNite.
88.3 WAER, bringing news that matters to you, making you better informed and better connected to your community.
Commanders do not have to have a quota for women in the infantry. That does not exist. It does not exist. And your statements are creating the impression that these exist, because they do not. There are not quotas. We want the most lethal force.
On 88.3 WAER, find our full program schedule at WAER.org.
There is a one-stop listen for everything Syracuse athletics.
You got great talent on this offense. Like, you can't go dormant for an entire quarter. And
the Ostrom Avenue podcast provides unique opinions, plus exciting interviews from industry experts.
Joined by Georgia Tech play-by-play broadcaster Andy Demetra, Syracuse.com, football beat reporter Emily Laker.
Check out weekly interviews on YouTube and listen at WAER.org or wherever you get your podcast.
Thanks for listening. We hope you're enjoying this WAER sports broadcast. Our sports staff goes where the teams go, home and away, and prepare for days before each game broadcast. Our talk show and podcast hosts analyze games, pore over stats, and keep up on sports trends. These and many behind-the-scenes opportunities are made possible by listener donations. So if you're a fan or an alum, donate to keep our sports legacy strong at WAER.org and click donate.
Closing up shop here on SportsNite. Jared Valentin, Jish Sokolsky directly across from me here on WAER from 8 to 9, breaking down all things Syracuse athletics. We talked about Syracuse men's basketball earlier in the show and how they're trying to clinch an ACC tournament berth. But someone who just did, or some team who just did, was Syracuse women's basketball. A big win over Pittsburgh last night. And if you have any thoughts on that game, let us know. 315-443-2011, the number to call. You can text us as well at 315-556-3929 and check out our live streams on Twitter and YouTube at WAER Sports Talk. Jish, Syracuse in the postseason.
I'm throwing confetti in the studio. If you're not watching the live stream, you're missing out, but I'm throwing confetti in the studio. This is a Syracuse team that said halfway through the year that it was rebuilding. After one of the two games WAER broadcast a 41-point loss to Boston College, Felicia Leggett-Jack, the head coach of the team, said, I hate to say it, but this is a rebuilding team. Well, not all rebuilding teams make the ACC tournament. You know what? Actually, a lot of rebuilding teams make the ACC
15 out of 18 teams get in.
I'm cleaning up all the confetti right now because it's really not that much of an achievement to make the ACC tournament. That's really what I'm getting at here. Both these men's and women's basketball team, congratulations on doing the bare minimum. You are not one of the three worst teams in a Power 4 conference. Hang the banner in the JMA Wireless Dome right now.
Hang the banners, but there's at least something to look forward to at the end of this season for Syracuse. Previously in a three-way tie with Miami and Pittsburgh for that 14th, 15th spot in the ACC, they now move up to 14th in the conference, but are ahead of Miami and Pitt because they just beat Pitt, and they also are ahead of Miami as well. But in that game, it's been a repeat of what has happened all year long with this team, Jish. The guard play. 46 points from Sophie Burrows and Georgia Woolley. That's just spectacular.
Can I get a...
From the guards.
Oh, I mean, that's kind of been the story all season, and I'm glad that they showed up when they had to against a really bad Pitt team. But 46 points is definitely nothing to sneeze at. Georgia Woolley has had a really good past two games. Honestly, dating all the way back to North Carolina.
Both had 20-plus tonight.
Right. Last night. She was really finding her footing. I mean, there have been times where Georgia Woolley has kind of disappeared or has shot inefficiently during the season. Even in winning efforts, she kind of takes a back seat. So it's really nice to see Georgia Woolley coming out, leading the offense with her scoring. But it's even better that Sophie Burrows is up there as well, because Sophie Burrows has shown flashes of brilliance throughout this season. Her three-point jump shot somehow has gotten even better from last season. And need I remind you, last year in the elimination game against UConn, she had 8 threes. Sophie Burrows is only a sophomore, and if this team is rebuilding like Felicia Leggett-Jack is saying, Sophie Burrows putting up 20 burgers on a night-in, night-out basis, she can be the future of this team. This Pitt game proved that to me.
Sophie Burrows has really taken her game to the next level. I mean, you mentioned how much she has broken out. She had a stretch a couple weeks back where she hit back-to-back career highs in points.
Yep.
She had 28 points against Virginia Tech and hit 8 threes. Went 8 for 12 from long distance. She was absolutely spectacular. And then to your point about Georgia Woolley earlier, how sometimes she's kind of taken a backseat a little bit. There's also been games, though, where Georgia Woolley has been the only person for Syracuse. Most notably against Stanford, where she had 18 points and nobody else had more than 7. And this is a Stanford team that right now Syracuse is projected to face.
It's not your grandmother's Stanford team, though, right? I mean, like, if this was Stanford last year and Syracuse had to play them in round 1 of the ACC tournament, you're biting your nails, you're sweating it out. But there's a reason Stanford's in this position as well. It's because, when you lose Cameron Brink and you don't have as much talent coming back, you're still in this position. And I think of after the Virginia Tech game, after Syracuse went on the road and stunned Virginia Tech on the road, the players were saying in the ACC, the worst team can beat the best team at any given night. And I have more faith that Syracuse women's basketball can play Kingslayer or beat teams that have beat them in the past than I do about Syracuse men's basketball. So a Stanford first-round matchup doesn't scare me as much as, say, like a Georgia Tech first-round matchup, which obviously wouldn't be the case. Georgia Tech's one of the best teams in the country. But there are a lot scarier teams SU could be playing. So Stanford doesn't make me yes, I recognize that on a West Coast trip, it's definitely tough to play out there. I think in North Carolina, where Stanford has to make the travel to the East Coast, that's something that should be talked about as well, because they haven't been the best team on the East Coast.
But the point still stands that someone has to step up besides Sophie Burrows and Georgia Woolley.
Sure.
Who do you think has to step up besides the 2 guards for SU? Let us know at 315-443-2011 and get at us on our text line at 315-556-3929. Jish, offensively, I go to the big man, and I preface this by saying Kyra Wood had a great game yesterday. 14 points, 7 for 8 from the field against Pittsburgh. I want to see that maintained going forward into ACC play, tournament play.
Absolutely. I feel like Kyra Wood's been such an enigma all season long because she seems to only play well when Georgia Woolley's also playing well.
She's been up and down.
I haven't really seen Kyra Wood take over a game. She is a very big presence, really great at getting rebounds, but pretty inconsistent at scoring. She had this really nice hook fade the other night against North Carolina. That was really good. She has it in her. And you're right, Jared. I would like to see her and Isabella Zhao, the grad student who they nicknamed Mama Bear, really step up and show it on the court. That they can dominate the glass. They can show their toughness. That's what Felicia Leggett-Jack is all about, showing how tough you are. But who I want to see step up, especially considering we've kind of already looked to the future of this Syracuse team, I want to see some freshmen step up. I want to see Shai Hawkins or Kira Scott or even Olivia Schmidt really step up as a third star, because if we want to have hope going into the future, it all starts with the 4-star, 5-star recruits you're bringing in panning out. Kira Scott has had flashes of brilliance. Shai Hawkins in the last game had herself quite the day.
That's what I was going to meant. That was going to be my next point. She had 9 points in the first half.
I think that if one of the two...
She had flashes.
Yes, if one of the two of them can really step up, and even if they lose, even if Syracuse loses round 1, if we can get a good outcome, if we can get a good showing from Kira Scott or Shai Hawkins, who both had 16 in the first game, we know they can do it. If they can show up in big moments with the new recruits coming in, Jasmine Cooper, Camden Nelson, this could be a team that you're afraid of next year. Right now, not so much, but
and I
want to see that.
And Shai Hawkins had flashes of that level that you want her to reach at. 9 points in the first half last night, had 16 the season high against Niagara in the first game of the year. And to your point about Isabella Verja a little bit earlier, she did struggle. 6 points, 3 for 9 from the field, but the bright spot for both of them was not on the offensive end. I know we're talking about offense right now, but on the defensive end in that first quarter, they showed flashes of a brick wall down low defensively. Khadijah Fye, third in the ACC in scoring, the Pittsburgh starting center, at 19 points a game. She had 4 points in the first quarter. Just one made field goal, and she was getting double teamed almost every play in the beginning of the game with Isabella Verjao and Kyra Wood. They were stonewalling her. The hands were held high. They were stopping her, forcing her to get turnovers. She couldn't do a lot in that first quarter. Granted, she adjusted as the game went on, but that defense was really special from Syracuse in those early stages of last night's win.
And that's really encouraging because Syracuse this season has had a tendency to show Syracuse fans why stars on other teams are stars. A lot of times the big names go off against Syracuse. In the Virginia Tech win, in the Duke loss, Toby Fournier had herself quite the day. So Syracuse isn't the best at shutting down a team's best player, but they've proved they could. Granted, it is a center, and not every team in women's basketball's best player is a center. It's usually going to be the quicker guard who can pass and shoot really well. Look at what Notre Dame's doing with Olivia Miles and Hannah Hidalgo. But it definitely is encouraging, and I think that there is a lot more optimism with this Syracuse team because of what you said. The defense can tighten up if need be. They were playing good defense against even Duke in the first half of that gargantuan loss. So I think the flashes are there, and I do have more faith that the women's team, rather than the men's team, could make a run in the ACC tournament just because there seems to be a culture. There seems to be something they've bought into, and I like to see that.
And you can thank head coach Felicia Leggett-Jack for that culture and that family atmosphere and that mentality that the Syracuse as a team has really bought in. But they got to play complete for a full 4 quarters of the game. Khadijah Faye, despite having 4 points in the first quarter, ended up with 25 and 10. And I know Syracuse never trailed in that game last night, but there were stages where Syracuse was up by 20, and then all of a sudden, Pittsburgh was within 4. So this game got dangerously close at times, and the stats and the result at hand, an 83-65 win, may not necessarily reflect that. But Pittsburgh was within arm's reach for a while in this game, and it was thanks to Khadijah Faye who dominated in the second half. So Syracuse has to step it up defensively for more than just 1 quarter.
It's nice to see Syracuse bury a team, though. It's kind of weird that we're on this sports night right now for, I guess, only 4 more minutes, talking about Syracuse basketball, both men's and women's, winning by double-digit points. I mean, it feels like the Syracuse of yesteryear, of days of old. The Block S is back. I mean, we both know what we know. We have the context, but it is nice to talk about Syracuse basketball having good times for a change,
It is, and we don't have to wait long before Syracuse men's basketball takes the court again, because we've got a doubleheader tomorrow on our airwaves. That's right, Syracuse men's basketball travels to Virginia Tech and takes on the Hokies. The Orange still trying to make an ACC tournament push, trying to clinch a spot in the tournament. Syracuse and Virginia go at it at noon tomorrow, Saturday, March 1st. McCord Remodeling countdown to tip-off starts at 11:30. And don't go anywhere after that game finishes, because we've got our next lacrosse broadcast shortly after, when Syracuse travels to Utah and takes on the Utes. And if you're wondering when the double overtime starts, we've got one double overtime up until 6 p.m. after the game with Tyler Aiken and Austin Barrick. They're not breaking down just the men's basketball game, but also the men's lacrosse game. What more could you ask for?
What did Kevin Harlan say? I'm calling both games.
What more could you ask for? But as for us here on SportsNite, that's going to do it. Alongside Joe Sokolsky, I'm Jared Valentin. Thank you so much for listening on WAER Syracuse. A couple thank yous to hand out before we sign off. Our producer, Dan Papillo, our reporter and play-by-play broadcaster, Hudson Ridley, all the way over in Utah. Our engineer, Sam Reese, and our WAER Sports Talk Desk, Nick King and Jason Stilakis. So that does it all for us here on SportsNite. I'm Jared Valentin saying thank you so much for tuning in. Catch us tomorrow when Syracuse, both teams, in action.